Hi everyone, and welcome to today's Why Software Development Estimates Are Wrong webinar. If you've come along to one of our webinars before, welcome back. And if this is your first webinar with us, thanks for joining us. I'm Chloe, I'm Reinteractive's Community Manager, and today James McGrath, our Development Manager, will be running our webinar, and Mikel, Lindsaar, Reinteractive's founder, will also be around jumping in every now and then to share some examples. So James, if you're ready, let's get started.
Thanks, Chloe. Welcome, everybody. So yes, as Chloe said, this webinar is about why software development estimates are wrong, and we're going to talk through some of the reasons software development estimates are typically wrong, and at the end we'll also discuss the process that we use at Reinteractive to try to ensure that we're getting more accurate estimates. So who are we? I think everyone knows who we are, but we're Reinteractive and we build online tools, predominantly in Ruby on Rails and Emma.js. We are a software consultancy of about 22 individuals, software professionals. And you know, even though we're quite small in the world of consultancies, we're actually the biggest Australian Ruby consultancy. So we're a little fish, a big fish in a small pond.
At least we keep saying that. We keep saying that, and no one's challenged us yet. So, challenge given.
Cool. All right. Who am I? I'm James McGrath, Development Manager at Reinteractive. I'm a developer at heart, and I love shipping great software. And the first thing we always do when we're talking to clients about building their software is to do the estimating process, which is a large part of what I do. With us also is Mikel Lindsaar. You heard his voice just a second ago. Maybe you'd like to say hello, Mikel.
G'day, everyone.
Mikel. Okay.
I can do dulcet songs as well. So if it gets really boring, I'll take over from James and start singing or something, and hopefully pick up the tempo. But I'm sure everything will go fine. Cool. So thank you, everyone, for spending your morning with us. It's much appreciated.
Now, I wanted to share a little fact about Mikel. He is the author of a mail gem, and he was bragging to me the other day that it's gone over. He was shouting from the rooftops. It's been downloaded now more than 30 million times. And to put that into perspective, Ruby on Rails, which is a major deal in the world of software development, has been downloaded by 40 million times. So the mail gem is a very important piece of that functionality. So it's very worthwhile bragging about. You also heard from Chloe Fisher, who is our community manager. She's instrumental in organising our community events. So you might have seen her at Install Fest or Development Hub, lots of other events in the community that she gets along to. And she's been instrumental in organising this webinar. So thank you, Chloe. The format, if you haven't been along before, is we're going to be talking for about 30 minutes at the start, and we'll have a question and answer time at the end. We could also take questions during the presentation. If you've got a question, just chuck it into that little questions widget that the webinar software provides. I'm going to be doing a lot of the talking, but Mikel will be chiming in now and again, so just feel free to interrupt me anytime, Mikel. All right, let's get on with the meat of the presentation.
Oh, I will interrupt you at any time, especially inappropriate moments, just like now as you're about to start. How about that?
Perfect. So the first step is in estimating. How do we estimate a product that hasn't been built yet? Really, you need to know what you want to build, and you are going to need to describe that in unambiguous terms. Now, one of the main reasons estimates go wrong is that unambiguous specifications are really expensive when it comes to software. Now, imagine you're building a house. You're going to ask your builder for an estimate on how much it's going to cost to build, and they're going to ask for specifications. And you'll need to provide them with things like house layout, ceiling heights, description of materials, positions of things like sinks, power points, fittings, and there's so much that goes into building a house. But typically, you won't decide all those things up front. because a lot of the cost in going into building a house is there's a lot of cost in the materials that you buy, and choosing the fittings, for instance, you're going to base your choice on the costs as you go along. So you're not necessarily going to provide the builder with great specifications on what they're going to build, but if you did want to find out a good estimate of how much your house is going to cost, you would try to document all these things, and it would take quite a lot of time. The thing about building a house, though, is that there is a lot of physical labor and costly materials that go into building a house, and there is a relatively low flexibility of the resulting product. So describing a house in detail in unambiguous terms is something you could do in, say, 10% of the final build cost. For a $300,000 house, you could do a very good job at describing that house with $30,000 worth of effort. Software is a bit different, though. Software doesn't have those costly materials involved. The closest I can think of might be expensive library costs, but that's not such an important thing anymore with lots of open source libraries. And software is really flexible in the way you approach things. You can do things many different ways in software. It's like the ultimate material flexibility-wise. You can do almost anything that your imagination allows. Unlike when you're building a house, it's very difficult to. There's only a certain number of ways you can lay out a wood floor. Another part of software development is that the time to implement some complexity is relatively small compared to when you're building something physical like a house. So you can build something quite complex in a small amount of time because we've got these advanced software tools compared to building something complex in the physical world. And that means that if you're trying to describe some complex things are a lot more difficult to describe in detail. And so having that ability to build things that are complex relatively quickly means that the specification costs when you're going to describe software are a lot higher than for something like a house. Another way to look at this is that the actual implementation of software is the process of documenting your requirements. But you're documenting them in a language that is unambiguous, and it happens that computer languages are the best way to do that. So the actual building of the product, you could say that is specifying things in an unambiguous way. And that really means that the cost of specifying for software, it's going to be more than 50% of the cost. And if you had a $300,000 budget for your project and then you were asked, oh, can you please spend half of that on specifying the project in great detail, you're probably going to say no, because you don't want to spend all of your budget just trying to detail what you're wanting. Really, you want to spend it on the building, and then that's the main reason people really avoid creating really detailed specs. So it's really hard to put enough detail into your specs to in a cost-effective manner that you can provide unambiguous specs to estimate on. And that's not such a bad thing. You don't want to waste lots of time doing this specking work because it doesn't actually produce the product necessarily. But it does mean that when you're starting off that software development process and asking for an estimate, you are going to be estimating on less than ideal foundations. You're not going to be estimating on rock solid specs. There's going to be some ambiguities in there, and that's just the reality of software development. All right, so that's one of the main.
I think another point on this is that when you're doing a building, you want the architect to give you a really good document saying this is where I want these walls, because I don't know about any of the participants, but I've knocked down a brick wall that was in the wrong place, and it was really hard work, and it took a long time. Moving a brick wall is quite hard. Changing a screen on a website is quite easy. But the other thing to bear in mind is that in architecture or in building construction, the process of specifying what the architecture is or what the building is, they are the drawings. They are the architectural drawings. And then we hand off those drawings to a builder or a construction team who go ahead and build the house, right? And occasionally those builders and construction teams will throw up errors and questions, and we'll send it back to the architect and say, this doesn't work, or this isn't right, or this is broken. Well, in software, the people that do the drawings and specify it all really are the programmers. They're the ones that sit down and write all the software code, and they do all the drawings, and they actually make the specifications by doing the drawings. And then they hand that specification document off to the workers, which are servers and systems out on the internet, automated computers. And occasionally those computers will throw up errors and questions, and they'll say this doesn't work or this is broken, and send it back to the programmer to get that fixed. So when you're looking at an analogy, the architect is really like the software developer, but a lot of people think that the software developer is more like the builder. Like, a lot of people think that the architect is the client or the person with the vision of what they want to build. No, they're not. The client doesn't know how to build the project. The person who's looking to build it doesn't have a good idea on how it's going to get built. And what they need to do is they need to say, this is what I want. That gets interpreted by the architect and software developer. And then the resulting plans get given to the builders to build it. It's just in our industry, it's very cheap to build once you've done the planning. And in the architecture industry, it's very expensive to build once you've done the planning. So that's more what it's like, the differences between them.
Exactly. So really, it's hard to estimate on what the software build's going to cost, because you are really estimating on the specification process. And it's hard to know what the end result of that specification process is at the start, because you're actually detailing what the client wants. All right, so that's one of the big reasons estimates are hard to do with software. Another big reason is that a lot of the outside influences on a project are unknown at the start of the project. So there are a huge number of factors that go into a successful project. Things like the project owner being good at communicating their thoughts and ideas about the project, what sort of third parties you have to interact with, the quality of the documentation that of different third-party systems that you're going to be dealing with. Is there a strong vision of the product, or are you exploring the space as you go along? All of these factors and more add a huge amount of overhead to the work of writing software. And without knowing these things in advance, an estimate can only guess at those things, and it really introduces a lot of uncertainty into your estimating process. Another big one, which is more recognized today than it used to be in the past, is shifting requirements. Developing software is often an exploratory in nature. New ideas, they crop up whilst you're going along. You're going to get feedback from your users. Changes are going to be requested. You're going to throw out old ideas. And it always happens whilst you're building a project. Even if you think you've got an excellent idea of what you are going to build, changes are always going to be requested once you've started building. And the longer the duration of the project, the more things are going to change as you go along, because it gives you more time to learn about the problem domain. So even if we took a step back and could actually magically get unambiguous specifications before we started developing, by the time we've actually implemented the software, it's going to have shifted. The requirements are going to shift before we've actually finished delivering. And so knowing how much it's going to change is a very difficult question, because it's an exploration. We build software. We don't know what we're going to build, exactly what we're going to build. And so by the time we actually have built it, things might be very different from where we thought we were going to be at the start. Another big reason for estimates going out of whack is that we can continually polish software. Let's have a look at an example of an address form, a delivery address form. We might deliver a delivery address form and it has all the standard fields on it. And then the we might say, oh, we don't like the order of those fields, so we go back and have another go at it and change the order. Then we think, oh, we'd like to change the wording of the label names because they're not quite right. We think that from user feedback, we're getting indications that they're a bit confusing. And then we'll change it to a layout of 2 columns, or maybe we'll turn it into a 2-step process. Perhaps we'll automatically populate the fields from past transactions. We could do IP lookups and look up where people are located in the world to automatically populate the country fields. We might, I don't know, change the available states based on the country selection. You might even change it to look up the address directly from an API. You could constantly change software and you constantly polish it. And knowing when the actual feature is actually finished, it can sometimes be a challenge because it's really easy to keep on tweaking things. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's great to really put polish into the software. Your customers do notice polish, but it's a hard thing to quantify at the start of the project, how much polish each feature needs. So if you don't leave any time for polishing, you're going to be up the creek, the proverbial creek. But it really comes down to the client's attitude, and knowing that right at the start of the project is very difficult.
There's another really key part about this on the polish is that, and James might go into this a little bit more, but if you as a client, or if you have a client, or if you are trying to do this estimation, if the client starts coming in with stuff, trying to get the polished stuff done early in the piece, it's still going to take 90% of the time. So you don't want to be doing that 10% of the work towards the front of the project, because if you're doing it at the front, you're not going to get the 90% delivered. And if you can't get the 90% delivered within the budget, then the client's not going to be happy because the site's not going to do what it wants. I've got a really great example of this, actually. We had a project where, what can I say? There was a very specific way that it was being implemented, and the client decided that they implemented this project in a very incredibly Ajax JavaScript heavy website with multiple panels on the site that could be moved and switched around, and did all these things, a lot like Pivotal Tracker. If you've ever seen Pivotal Tracker, there was all these panels on the screen and you could move the jobs between panels and drag and drop them and do all this sort of stuff. Very flashy, very polished, really cool, you know. But the problem was that those panels didn't actually add anything to the functionality of the project. And the project itself could have been easily delivered with just simple create, read, destroy screens, right? Very simple CRUD operation screens. And if we had delivered it and if we'd held our space and our decision on this and said, no, we're going to push this, we would have gotten 90% of the project delivered under budget, and it would have been working and it would have been fine. But because they had been sold very heavily on, you must have this Ajax thing by an external consultant, it ended up running over and running over and running over, because every time we'd go to make a change, it was inordinately more complex to make that change because we had to handle this highly complex user interface, and it cost a lot of money. And it was, you know, I mean, we ended up getting the product and it did get out, it did work, but it ran over time and it wasn't the most successful project we've done. And after that point, we decided, okay, we're really going to start focusing in on get that 90% of the work done in the 90%, you know, push the 10% off to the end and then do it as you have budget available.
That's a good story. Thank you, Michael. All right, so yeah, it's really easy to get waylaid by that continual polishing, and it's hard to put that into your estimate. Another thing that is a trap for the unwary is when you're estimating your functionality, it's very easy to forget all the different project overhead in your estimates. Coding a software is not just writing the software. You've got to do a lot of other things that support those tasks, like writing test suites, getting code reviews, clarification of requirements, doing small tweaks here and there, and doing walkthroughs to the client of the functionality. And those things are really easy to forget when you're estimating how long it's going to take to produce a feature. And so really you want to be estimating the feature from the analysis stage right through to delivery and working on the production system. You don't want to just think about how long it takes me to code it and put it up for review. And if you don't take those things into account, your estimates are going to be way off. And that is a trap for an inexperienced person, software developer, when they're doing those estimates. Another reason that software developers can provide bad estimates is that the best tool we've got for predicting the future is past experiences. Accurate estimates are going to be made for pieces of the system that we've had experience with before. If we've created a sign-in flow before, we're going to know, be in a lot better position to estimate how long and how much effort it will take to create such a piece of functionality. If we're looking at a piece of functionality that we've never tried making before, it's completely novel, and we don't really have any idea on how to build it, then that's going to be very difficult for the person to estimate. Bespoke software, by definition, has unique characteristics. There's no point building software if it's not different from another piece of software, because you can just use that other piece of software. You can buy it off the shelf rather than paying that extra money to build your own version of the software. It doesn't make sense. So the software that we're building has got lots of unique characteristics, and each piece of software we build is going to have lots of different pieces of functionality. Some will fall on the scale of, oh, I've done that before, and I've done it recently, and I remember how to do it and how long it took. The other end of the scale is you've got no idea, and you're going to provide good estimates on things that fall one side of that scale, and terrible estimates if they fall at the other end. And really, the estimates are going to be so bad at the other end that you shouldn't even attempt to estimate it. The software developer needs to say, I really don't know how to estimate that. I'm going to have to do a lot of research, and that's very difficult sometimes to swallow. And sometimes developers get pressured to deliver an estimate that they have no confidence in, and if that's worse than delivering an estimate that you've got no confidence in is worse than not delivering an estimate at all. But sometimes it happens. So really, at the start of a project, if you identify things that you do not have a good understanding of, and that a software developer does not have any idea on how long it's going to take, best not to pressure them into giving an estimate. Better to give them time and budget to go off and explore that further, and so that they can provide you with a decent estimate. The next problem with software estimates, developers often view the world through rose-tinted glasses. And it's really easy in software development to forget all of the little difficulties and snafus that we run into when we're developing software. If a non-software developer was to sit and watch a software developer work, some of the tasks that the software developer does could be quite mind-numbing and maddening to watch from the outside, and it can be maddening for the software developer. Sometimes small bugs get introduced in the logic, and it takes hours to track them down, trying to find them. You might be fighting with the use of a third-party library that you've never used before, and it takes ages to find the right setting that is blocking your progress. And there's lots of little examples of this. You might be finding some obscure edge case in some logic, and it really takes its toll on your productivity. But it's easy to forget about those things when you are estimating. You think, oh, I know exactly how to do that. You remember that when it's really flowing, when your software development's really working well, and you sort of push it out of your mind when you're spinning your wheels and not being productive. And so if you forget about that flip side, then you are going to come up with estimates that are overly optimistic, and you're going to get yourself into a position where the estimates are completely wrong. And so it can be a good idea to be a bit of a cynic when you're a software developer doing your estimating, and be very pessimistic about your abilities to deliver quickly.
Just on this point, we've had many examples of this in our company. I mean, we have 22 staff now, right? So we've got 16 odd people that are developers, and they'll get into situations where they'll say, yeah, I can get that done in a day, and they go and tell the client that, and then it takes 4 weeks. I mean, I don't think that's happened, but you know, it can take more time, and it's always better to underestimate and then over-deliver. So you'd be better off saying it's going to take a couple of days to do this and then deliver it in a day. And you're always better off to keep a buffer in there and try and make sure it doesn't happen that way. We've had developers that have given estimates that have been wrong, and we've had developers that have been given estimates that are right. But usually it is this rose-tinted glasses that does cause the problem, because developers want to believe that they can fix the problem. You know, they want to think that they can solve it because they've done it before. So yeah. So actually, we just had a question which I might just mention because it's valid at this point. Joe just asked, is there a category that is something like no one anywhere in the world has done this before? It's actually a really interesting question, because quite often we actually say that to our clients. You know, they come to us and they say, hey, we want to build this product. How much is it going to cost? And we'll go back to them and say, well, has anyone else done this before? And they go, well, no, that's why we want to build it, because it's going to make so much money. And we go, well, there you go. You know, estimating is going to be really hard because no one's done it before. So we think we can do it. You know, I mean, we know we can do it. Given enough budget and time, we can definitely get it done. But it comes down to how much risk is the client willing to take. And you can do things to mitigate that. You know, if you are doing something that no one's done before, and the client's edgy on that, well, then you can approach, well, what part of it has been done before, and perhaps we could do that first to get some part of the product out. So at least the client starts to earn some sort of an income off the product. You know, or starts getting some user validation, or starts collecting identities, or whatever it is that's needed to start turning that website or web application into a product that they can actually use. And then once it starts moving, then try implementing that thing that's never been done before, because now they've got some revenue behind them and some momentum and all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, thanks, James.
Cool. All right, so there's lots of reasons why it's hard to do estimates accurately, but it is possible to come up with estimates that are based in reality. But you really need to set yourself up for success. You want to be grounding those estimates in experience. The more experience that a developer has, the more accurate they're going to be able to estimate. You're going to need to set aside time and energy and budget to research into the unknown. If you can reduce the size and duration of the project, you've got less chance that your requirements are going to be able to shift whilst you're in development mode, and that's going to help with keeping those estimates accurate. The more information you provide to the developer, the better. We can never get completely unambiguous requirements or specifications, but we can try to get better at it. And yeah, basically those things can all add up to a much better chance of delivering an accurate estimate. So we're running low on time, but I will quickly talk through how we estimate at Reinteractive. The first thing we like to do is...
Because I've stolen all the time by interrupting at inappropriate moments.
That's all right. It's can eat into the question time because one of them was a question. We wireframe things. Often in Agile, proponents of Agile sort of talk about requirements being a dirty word. And I don't think that is quite true. You can have requirements with Agile. You need some sort of requirements. You just have to have a balance. You don't want to go so heavy on the requirements that by the time you finish the requirements, they're out of date. You want to find a balance. And a UX specialist creating a clickable wireframe is a great way to do it. They're trained to elicit requirements and to document them in a way that is really tangible and really tactile. So the product you'll get out of that process will be a wireframe that is clickable and can be great for getting feedback from your users and that helps you refine your ideas before you actually start putting effort into coding, which is a good idea. And they're really good for estimating by developers, because the developer can play with the wireframes and look at all the different features that have been made available on those wireframes and break it down from there. A UX wireframe, I can't stress how highly valuable those are in the whole software development process. They are just a great way to communicate your ideas. So once you've got a wireframe of the software that we'd like to build, what we want to do is isolate an iteration of work from it. The idea is you don't want to try to estimate the whole thing, because, as we've seen, it's hard to get if you provide an estimate on a lot of work, by the time you're halfway through that work, you are going to be wanting to change some of those requirements. So you want to take a subsection of that work, subsection of the functionality, and make a development iteration out of it. So a good way to think about this is to use the MVP concept, which we have talked about in our past webinars, and Chloe can provide links to our recordings of those webinars for those who are interested. But the idea is to identify a set of functionality that will provide some value to your users that you can release as a standalone product, and get that product in front of users and getting feedback. And so you're reducing your scope to the minimum amount of functionality possible. And you've got to be ruthless here. If you're in doubt about the functionality, you just leave it out. And this process it can be quite difficult, but it's something that an experienced development partner can help you with.
And that's a really good little catchphrase there from James. If in doubt, leave it out. And if you can drum that into the client early, that really helps. And the way that you do this is in your first discussions with the client, when you're first starting it, you brief them about this idea that, look, well, there's another really good thing that I say to every client that we talk to, that available budget will always, always, always be less than required features. Always. I've not seen a project in all my years of software development, even in companies and organizations that don't even have a budget associated with it, they've just got full-time staff, then requested features will always exceed available resources. But if you can get a client to understand that at the start of the engagement, and if they can't quite understand it, just pull some examples out of the air. You know, have you ever tried to buy a car? And the client goes, well, yeah. You say, well, did you ever want a car that you couldn't afford? And they went, well, yeah, all the time. And you went, well, there you go. Or have you ever renovated a house? Did you ever have to make compromises because of budget, because you couldn't afford it? Well, yeah, okay. So that happens everywhere, and especially in software, right? So if you get that across to them and you get them to understand that, then when you come back to them a bit later and they've come and asked you for a really nicely rounded button in the top right-hand corner that's going to take 3 weeks to implement because it has to change everything, you can say to them, look, yeah, we can do it, but I'm not sure if it's going to fit. So if in doubt, let's leave it out. So instead of saying we're not going to do it at all, you can push it to the end of the queue and you say, look, let's get the 90% of the work done. Let's keep the focus here on this 90% block. This is the major important stuff. If we get this done, you're going to have a product that's going to be producing you income. That's the most important thing we need to do. We need to get you a product that produces income. Once we got to that stage, good. Then let's look at putting that really shiny button there. But if in doubt, leave it out. Keep pushing it back. Thanks, James.
Cool. So once you've got that MVP of functionality, you can get that each piece of functionality and break it down into fine-grained requirement stories, functionality stories. And you want to make each piece of functionality something that you can implement. Each story represents a piece of functionality that you can implement rather quickly. So in an hour, 2 hours, 4 hours, nothing over a day. And that way you break things down. And I like to compare this to a shopping list when you're out shopping. Often when you're shopping, you will come to the end, the checkout, and you will think, I've only got 5 items in this list. And the total price that you have to pay at the end is a lot higher than you are imagining. But then you go and add up each item, and it actually adds up to a lot, much more than what you thought it was going to be. And if you've got your list of all these stories, it's surprising how much they can add up to. And so it's really important to have them broken down in a fine-grained manner, because that allows you to get much more accurate estimation. Because if you try to say, oh, I'm going to estimate on the whole thing at once, you're not going to have very much luck, because you're going to forget all those little details. So you break things down and list them out. And it's really important from a product owner point of view. If you're ever talking to a software developer and they've got a list of things that they're going to implement, if it's not in the list, it's not in the estimate. Never assume that something that is not in the list is actually in there because it's just assumed to be there, because that's really not how estimates work. So then after we've broken down that functionality, we estimate on each piece. Now at Reinteractive, we use a point system instead of estimating in hours, and there's many good reasons for doing that. I can't go into all those reasons right now. I have written a blog post on the subject. Chloe could provide a link in the chat if you'd like to check that out. But we assign points, and they're roughly based on time, but by going with points, it gives us a lot more flexibility as we go along, and it helps us learn more. So we assign different points to the pieces of functionality, and then we total up those points, and we have got our iteration. Now we want to try to keep these iterations quite small, say 4 weeks or less in duration, and that will allow us, once again, I'll repeat, we want to implement it as quickly as possible, implement that estimated functionality as quickly as possible, so that there's less time for the requirements to shift, and that's going to allow us to get much closer to the first initial estimate. So you've got your
That's actually a really key point there. Sorry, I know we're going a bit over time, but I like talking. That's actually a really key point. You want to keep your iterations short because the longer the iteration, the more time there is to shift, and it's actually a killer point. We had a client where the software project just kept extending, by the week, which was fine. The client wanted the extra work done and all that sort of stuff. But it makes it really hard to get your estimates right, because what happens is the scope just keeps expanding, which, we have to embrace change and all this sort of stuff. But if you're going to do estimation, you need to keep that estimate as short as possible so that you have a chance of being somewhat right. If you're trying to estimate over, really accurately estimate on a story basis like this, 6 months of work, you're going to be wildly wrong. A 6-month estimate is going to be something like, we'll get the site built, and that's sort of the estimate. We'll get the site built based on further discussion with the client. You're not going to get much closer to what you're going to get done in that period of time, because it's too much time for things to change. You could say over a week, you might be able to say, we'll be able to get the full user sign-in flow functioning and well-tested and operational. That would be possible because it's a defined short amount of work that has limited space for scope change. So the smaller the scope, or the smaller the chunk that you're estimating, the more accurate you're going to be able to become.
Cool. So basically that's your iteration, and then you want to rinse and repeat, and you're going to be able to do further iterations in the future. And the beautiful thing about doing more iterations with a released product is you can get feedback from your customers and users, and you're going to be learning. But also you are going to learn so much from the development team and the product owner. You're going to learn a lot more about the project dynamics that we talked about earlier. So we're going to learn how good the estimates are of the software developers, and how much influence the client and the third parties are going to be having on this process. And so your estimates for each subsequent iteration are going to be based on a lot more information, and it's going to help them to be more and more accurate as you go along. And that is how we do estimating at Reinteractive. So that brings us to the end of the webinar content. The next webinar that we're going to do is going to explore the idea of using points to estimate, and how it is a powerful tool for your project planning. Zoe will be sending out an email after this webinar is finished. In it, it will include a link to sign up for the next webinar, but it will also include a survey form that will allow you to give us feedback on this webinar, which would be very much appreciated. Also, you're very welcome to get in touch to ask questions via email or hit us up on our website to read our blog.
Joe's given us a round of applause, which is nice. Thank you, Joe, for clap, clap, clap. Will you email out a link? So Joe's just asked if we'll email out a link. Are you talking about a link for this webinar, Joe? Yeah, definitely. Chloe will send that out. We'll put this up online. It will be on YouTube soon, as are all of our other videos. So you can subscribe to the YouTube channel and you'll get a notification, but it will also come out as a link in the next Reinteractive review. So just make sure you're subscribed to our newsletter, and we'll get that out there. So yeah, we're going to end off in a moment, and if there's any questions, feel free to email us. We are all approachable via email. You can definitely ask us any questions you want, and if you have a project that you've got that needs to be done that's a large scale, please let us know and we can look after it and make it happen. And otherwise, thank you very much for attending, and it's been a pleasure giving this to you, and hopefully we'll see you at the next webinar.